Howdy, friends and neighbors. Thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is Zachary Faddis. Sometimes I am the president of Aura, but not tonight. Tonight I get the privilege to be a moderator of the candidate forum for City Council District 10, focusing on land use and transportation issues that we are calling Building an Abundant Austin. The we in that statement is a coalition of organizations that share a similar vision. A vision of an Austin that is welcoming and affordable to people of all walks of life, the young and the old, newcomers and old hats, the rich and the poor. We want our beautiful city to be a bastion that gives everyone the opportunity, both economic and social, to live a good life where they can comfortably afford their rent and have easy access to friends, food, fun, healthcare, amenities, and essentials. We need a vision in Austin that gives everyone prosperity and dignity without having to make choices that are unsustainable for both themselves and our planet. Central to all these things is the choices we give our citizens and how they are allowed to live and move throughout our city. The people with the most control over those choices is not Joe Biden or Greg Abbott, it is your local city council. So this coalition has decided to host forums in 3 of the city council races, 6, 7, and 10. We are starting with 10, and we hope you'll join us for 6 and 7 in the coming weeks. This forum is nonpartisan and meant only to inform the public. We invited both candidates to this forum. Unfortunately, Mark Dukin has decided not to join us. The silver lining is that we get more time with Ashika Ganguly. Please give her a hand and a warm welcome to her for spending the evening with us and deciding to run. Our democracy depends on people like her stepping up. This forum is going to be split into 2 parts with a 15-minute intermission at 7, during which our partners will give a quick spiel about themselves. Then we will continue speaking to Ms. Ganguly until 8. I have a list of questions I need to get through, one from each of our partners, and if we have time, we'll do some audience questions. If at any time you think of something you want to ask, please write it down and hand it to Felix, who is going to be the question master for the evening. Before we get started, I just want to recognize all the people and organizations that helped make tonight possible. Thank you to the core organizers, Alan Verani, Amy DeLuda, Peter Breton, Ryan Pizicki, and Felix DePortu. Thank you to Chad Swiatecki, who was supposed to be our moderator, but fell ill this morning, which is why you're left with me. We wish him a speedy recovery. Thank you to St. Matthew's Episcopal Church for hosting us in such an amazing space. Thank you to Timothy Bray from representing Cheeto Vela's office in District 4. And thank you to all of our partners who helped make this possible. So Aura, Safe Streets, Farm and City, Rethink 35, FAN, Environment Texas, Sunrise ATX, The New Liberals, and Movability. And with that out of the way, we'll start with the most important question of the night. Ashika, who are you and why are you running?
It's a great question. Hi, everyone. Thank you, first of all, to Zach and Aura and all the other organizations for hosting this event. Also, thank you to St. Matthew's for hosting us here. Thank you to all of you for being here tonight. My name is Ashika. I am running for Austin City Council District 10 here in beautiful West Austin. I am a lifelong West Austin resident, born and raised. I am a former Austin ISD public school teacher, and I currently do legislative work at the Texas Capitol for State Rep John Busey. He's a good one. Everything I do today is because of my time in the classroom as a teacher. Every policy decision I make is because of my time as a teacher. During my 5 years in the classroom, I taught at Matthews Elementary in Clarksville in downtown Austin, and we were a really interesting school, especially for the topics that we're going to talk about tonight. We were an open transfer school, so we had a lot of students taking public transit to and from school. We had students from the historic neighborhoods of Clarksville, from the high-rises downtown, from the grad student housing on Lake Austin Boulevard, from areas of East 5th and 6th Street, and we also were the homeschool for the Salvation Army homeless shelter at the time. So you can imagine I had a really clear view into a lot of issues in the city that were going on. I really saw the city reflected in my students' lives in a really major way, and was able to see how policy, and local policy in particular, really does affect the safety, stability, and happiness of our citizens. And that's not even to mention all of the state issues going on with schools and kids and teachers. But all of that led me to pursue a career in public policy. I went to UT and got my master's in policy, and I have been working at the Capitol for State Rep John Busey for the last 2 years. I'm so excited to be running for office in my home city, and I'm very excited to be looking at issues around affordability, environmental protection, public safety, and local control.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
So our first question is from Fan, Friends of Austin Neighborhoods. What is your vision for how you want District 10 and its neighborhoods to look like?
I think that's a perfect question to really get this evening started. When I think about my neighborhood in the rest of Austin, I think about a place where it's an intergenerational community where people can continue to live, stay, and reinvest their talents in their neighborhoods, in the city, where we have equal opportunity for enrichment, shopping, parks, dining, grocery stores, and all the other different things that make our life so enriched and important in every area of Austin. I also think about mobility and connectivity, where we're able to go from one side of the city to the other without a huge headache. I was telling these guys up here that on my way here, I was sitting in bumper to bumper traffic, running late, and I was like, trying to bang my head against the steering wheel, trying to get from the Capitol to here. And so that's one issue I'm really thinking about, is just mobility around the city. We know that there have been large historic cultural divides between East and West Austin, North and South Austin. How can we connect every part of the city and make every part of the city happy, safe, and accessible?
Thank you so much. And so when you think about the neighborhoods that you do enjoy and the vision that you have, what are the barriers to creating those kinds of places? What is an existing land use policy or practice that stands in the way of achieving the kind of neighborhoods and the kind of District 10 that you would like?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few. Building off what I was talking about of trying to get over here to St. Matthews, from the Capitol downtown, we have so few transit options on the west side of Austin. And it's really creating a barrier to connectivity and mobility to this area of Austin in particular. And it really just feeds into this, narrative that West Austin is far off, separate, elite, et cetera, which we know is not true. There are so many people like me continuing to make our lives in this area of Austin. But it's kind of a chicken or the egg situation. We have low ridership in these areas of Austin, so then we continue to cut transit in this area of Austin. And then because there's not a lot of transit, people get out of the habit of using transit. They become more car-centric, and then it's just self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think connectivity, especially for my district and to the rest of Austin, is a big issue for me.
Thank you. If elected, from our friends at Aura, if elected, what will you do to make District 10 affordable and welcoming to people from all walks of life?
Yeah, I think number one is just addressing affordability as an umbrella topic. And when I think about affordability, I'm thinking about multiple different areas underneath that umbrella. And housing, land use is one part of that, but there's also so many other pieces to that. Making sure that we have efficient and effective government processes. We've spent a lot of our tax dollars, like millions and billions of dollars, on a lot of different city services. We need to make sure we're getting a return on investment to every one of those dollars, whether it's our homeless services, our public safety initiatives, and everything in that area. And then in terms of housing affordability, my background is, like I said, born and raised in West Austin. I have gotten the opportunity to live 15 minutes away from my childhood home and my parents for my entire adult life. And that's a really special thing, that I get to continue to live and reinvest my talents and make my life here in West Austin. But that wouldn't be a possibility for me if I didn't have a condo to live in. And that was a diverse housing option that was available to me, so I could continue to stay in this area that I love. But we don't see enough of that over here. So for me, I'm really thinking about how can we have more diverse housing options while still preserving and maintaining the beautiful culture of West Austin. I often talk to my neighbors about, we all chose to live on this side of Austin because we have, shaded residential streets, we have lots of trees, I can walk my dog, and it's really a quiet residential feel while still being able to live in the urban core. And I think that there are ways to have denser housing, more diverse housing options while still maintaining that neighborhood feel. And I think that we need to have those options at every rung of the socioeconomic ladder.
Absolutely. You talked about that there were certain government services that you didn't think that maybe weren't getting our best bang for the buck locally. Could you think of like a service or maybe give an example?
Sure. Number one that comes to mind is our homeless services here in Austin. We have so many unhoused neighbors that need mental health treatment, need permanent supportive housing and other various wraparound services. There has been a lot of different varieties of efforts at the city level to address the issue. There has been a lot of amazing nonprofits in the city doing work around the issue, but it's been a little disjointed, and we've invested a lot of money in the issue and still seeing the problem continue to be exacerbated. So one thing on my mind is thinking about how can the city serve as a kind of navigating and streamlining force among the various nonprofits? How can we invest more dollars on the front end for preventative homeless services policies? There are studies to show that if you catch someone who's on the brink of homelessness or in the first 10 days of being on the street, it's much more successful at getting them permanently into housing. But we're seeing a lot of, back-end emergency in short-term transitional housing where we could be spending more efforts on the front end.
Yeah, I know, something that that I haven't personally been heavily involved with, but I know has been a big issue, has been we have this we have this certain amount of homeless money. A lot of it is coming from the federal government, the American Recovery Act. So it's like more or less a one-time sum of money.
Yeah.
We're spending a lot of it on short-term shelter rather than permanent supportive housing. I know that where to prioritize those has been a big issue. It sounds like you're much more in terms of front-end permanent supportive housing. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, yeah. And then another thing I'll say is that we know that mental health resources go hand in hand with housing. And so we have to have the wraparound services in place to support mental health. That is an area that we've been left out to dry by the state to an extent. So I'm really interested to look into alternative, federal grants that we could go after and different sources of funding to make up the difference that the state is leaving for us.
Absolutely. So from our friends at Movability, people who live in Austin regularly need to use a card to go to a store or access services. Thinking about the trips that you regularly make, are there any kinds of businesses or services that you wish were within walking distance from your home? And what can we do to make that possible for you? You specifically.
So many. So I live in Deep Eddy, which is the southern edge of Tarrytown. And I tell people all the time, pretty much it feels like I have to get in my car and drive across Mopac to do anything almost. There's a handful of businesses in Tarrytown, but not enough. And even the ones that are there aren't really walkable. One of my favorite things to talk about is our new H-E-B on Lake Austin Boulevard. I was one of the first people in line to get coffee that morning at H-E-B at 7 a.m. Watched it being built for 2 years. It really has been transformational for our neighborhood. I used to drive either to the Hancock H-E-B or to the Westlake H-E-B just to do my groceries, like a 15-20 minute 40-minute round trip just to go to the grocery store. And I've seen how transformational that grocery store has been to our neighborhood. Still, it's technically within walking distance of my apartment. It's not really walkable. We don't have consistent sidewalks on the way there. There's high traffic areas on Exposition. So that's definitely one thing I'm thinking about. And then, all the other things I was talking about, parks, dining, shopping, all of those things, there's just not enough of that, especially in my neighborhood. In this area of Northwest Hills, there's a lot of great options and multi-use development on Far West Boulevard and Mesa, and I'd love to see some of that spread out to the rest of District 10.
And what do you think we can do to make that a reality? Just
rezoning some areas and the like.
So from Farm and City, what policies can we pursue to give current and future D10 residents affordable options to live lower carbon, less car-dependent lifestyles?
Yeah, so obviously number one for less car-dependent lifestyles is transit. We need to have more transit options available to folks in D10. But the other piece of that is getting people to use the transit. So
Yeah.
I'm really interested in thinking about ways to do kind of a public awareness and public engagement campaign in terms of transit, especially with regards to this area of Austin. Another thing I really enjoy talking about is the McCalla station that just opened up on the Red Line. And I've seen that that's a very well utilized transit option as compared to some other transit options because it's an area that people are already going to. It makes sense. We're meeting people where they're at. We're eliminating inconveniences for them. Already you have to pay, $25 for parking. You have to circle the stadium 4 times to get a spot. You have to sit in traffic on the way out. So having that transit option into the stadium has been really transformative. I think in order to get people to use transit, we have to make it so it's eliminating headache for them, not creating more headache, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I was going to ask a question about like a Project Connect and the Metro Rapid lines. I was looking at the map, and there's some that are close, but I don't think there's any Metro Rapid line for one of the future Metro Rapid lines that are going to go into D10.
Yeah. And so there's also, been social studies done to show that people are much more likely to use especially the higher the socioeconomic status of the area, people are more likely to utilize a rail versus bus. So that's one thing I think that we should really be thinking about. If we have a bus that's coming into West Austin, but people aren't using it, is it effective? Again, it's about eliminating hassle, eliminating headache for people. Right now, I think if there used to be an 803 rapid line on Lake Austin Boulevard, and for me to take that, it would have been, a 15-minute walk. At the time, especially during COVID, the bus was irregular, and it really added like 20, 30 minutes to my commute to get to campus when I was in grad school. So I'm really thinking about how can we eliminate those inefficiencies.
Absolutely, yeah. To get rail in West Austin, it's the chicken or egg problem that you were talking about.
Yeah.
Like we currently at today's levels, I don't know that we could support them. Oh yes, I apologize. In fact, maybe we should switch to microphones. This is a loud space, and I got a big voice. I don't know why I'm doing this. Thank you so much, Miriam. Yeah, it's the chicken or egg problem that you were talking about. Rail in West Austin sounds exciting, but it also, it means that you might have to accept some more neighbors in that area.
Right.
To ride the rail.
Right. It's simply not dense enough to support having a rail line out that way. It's too spread out, so it really just doesn't make economic sense right now. So I hope that we can get to a point where we can have rail going out to West Austin and it is utilized. I think that if we did have it and there was, transit-oriented development around that stop, it would be utilized.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So from the Austin New Liberals, in the last decade alone, over 400 pedestrians and cyclists have been killed in vehicular accidents. We've implemented a number of different proposals to allow for safer streets, such as ATX Walk Back Roll and encourage different forms of transportation, including Project Connect. What do you think of these initiatives, and how can we build our communities in a way? How can we build our streets to be safer, more pleasant places to be?
Yeah, I fully support all of these initiatives. I think they're much needed and very important. I think that the number of ghost bikes that I've been seeing around town has significantly decreased since when I was growing up, which is something that's really promising. When I'm thinking about bike and pedestrian accidents, fatalities, et cetera, it just shows me that the more that we densify, the more we move away from a car-centric society, the more we need to have the infrastructure to match these new alternative modes of transportation. So to me, that means protected bus lanes and bike lanes on major roadways. It means pedestrian urban trails that make sense. And like I said, meeting people where they're at. Think about the places where people are, where they are going. And we need to have urban trails that are clean, safe, well utilized. When I was in grad school, I was a bike commuter. I would bike from my condo in Tarrytown to campus, and I would usually go a large part of the way on the Shoal Creek Trail and then do like the last 4 blocks on the street. And I will tell you, I felt 9 billion times safer on the Shoal Creek Trail as a bike commuter than I did on the street. So, because at the time there were no protected bike lanes on Rio Grande or 21st Street.
Yeah, we have like a bike master plan, and including urban trails, and it's quite the thing that's on paper is quite ambitious, but the rate that we're building them out is not terribly ambitious. I think maybe 4 miles. I think I've heard before that we're set to complete it by 2050 maybe.
Right.
And I think eventually, I don't know what I don't know the exact funding mechanism or how we can get that to go faster, but.
Yeah, and I don't have a magic bullet off the top of my head, but it's definitely something I want to look into, what alternative funding sources. I do think that there are several federal grants that we could research and go after that we're maybe not utilizing to the fullest extent.
Well, so this is still up in the air, and we don't exactly know what it's going to look like, but word on the street is that there's a good chance that we are going to have a climate bond in 2025 next year. So, think about bike lanes and other things that we can do as a city. Are there any things that if we did have such a thing and you were on the dais and had the ability to advocate for certain projects that you'd be interested in seeing funded?
Yeah, specifically with regards to building and development, I'd love to see incentives for more green building initiatives, passive solar design, and, giving homeowners and property owners incentives and rebates for retrofitting their property with more energy efficient HVAC units, toilets, washers, etc. I think that there's a lot of things that we can do is reclaim water use with purple piping, especially we have this initiative for new developments, but how can we go back to old developments and retrofit those with purple piping to protect our lake levels? All of those are on my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just answered one of our questions, but I think I'm obligated to ask it anyway from Sunrise, Texas. The energy costs of heating and powering homes are second only to transportation in our regional CO2 production. They're very close. What initiatives would you support as a council member to help to reduce the energy costs per person of both new and existing housing stock? And I think.
Yeah, so a lot of the things I just spoke about, but then also, just any policy, which is the way that council is going right now, but any policy to encourage more diverse housing options, mixed use developments, so people don't have to get in their cars and drive to go do essential tasks and everyday tasks. We know that compact, walkable communities are better for the environment, so we should be pursuing policies centered around those. And then, like I said, energy efficient housing design, green building initiatives, and then energy efficient building codes as well.
Yeah. Something I think about when I think about your district and moving to the kinds of communities and the way of life that you're referring to is, it's a very low density in many parts of it. And so, the question is, how do we transition, and how, and it's going to be that way for a while. And, obviously we're not going to go from, single family suburbs to skyscrapers. And so how do we, slowly transition in a way that is friendly to the community and that, slowly improves the life, how do we retrofit our more suburban areas to allow for lower carbon lifestyles? Yeah,
and I think it has to, so first of all, one thing I really talk to neighbors in my district about, and I want to make clear is I deeply believe in the culture of this area, and I do not want to change the culture of D10 or West Austin.
Yeah.
So I tell people, I'm not going to be the one advocating for high rises in West Austin. I do think that there are denser housing options that maintain that culture, maintain the neighborhoods, while also providing for more affordable, more accessible, more available housing, and reducing the effect on the environment as well.
Absolutely. So Rethink 35, one of our partners, their question, what is your position on the proposed I-35 expansion? If you oppose I-35 expansion, are there alternative visions that you would support? The two biggest in Austin is Reconnects, which is more about caps and burying the highway and putting caps and stitches, paving over the highway, burying it underground, and then Rethink 35, the idea for a boulevard.
Yeah, my official position on I-35 expansion is that I'm still learning and listening. I don't necessarily have a hard line position on the issue. I do think that highway expansion has been historically seen, empirically seen, to not actually be helpful at reducing traffic. It does encourage more fatalities with narrow lanes and greater traffic, more congestion, et cetera, et cetera. I know that there are talks about, having highways should be going around cities, not through cities, et cetera. I think that this conversation is not necessarily aligned with the reality of the situation. Especially through my time at the state, I've been privy to conversations about I-35, especially with regards to the local delegation at the House, TxDOT, et cetera. And it seems like this is moving forward. I do think that there are environmental impacts we can mitigate. I think Rethink 35 has done really great work on making sure that we have robust environmental impact studies, that we're making sure that we have as little impact to local businesses as possible. I do think that the Cap and Stitch program is promising. I personally know how divided East and West Austin has always been since my childhood. I think that Cap and Stitch provides a really promising opportunity for us to literally visually eliminate that cultural divide. And it's also really, really prime real estate, especially for the University of Texas and other businesses in the area in the middle of downtown Austin, that we could now gain really valuable land that we could gain as a city through Cap and Stitch.
Yeah, that's so. My understanding, and you might know more than this for your negotiations, is that the state has told us that they will not cap and stitch it. They will design it in such a way that we can cap and stitch it if we want to. And that number seems to be ever growing. The last I heard, maybe probably someone in the audience knows better than me, I want to say something like 600-700 million. If someone knows better, please speak up. But and I, if you're elected, I think that there's a good chance that during your tenures, when we're going to have to come to a decision of the city, are we going to pay for this, and how, if so?
Right. And I think that's one area that we could push back on the state and ask TxDOT to pay for some of that, because it is their initiative. They are the ones pushing for 35 expansion, so they should be footing the bill for us to mitigate some of the effects of it. I think that is just a constant theme when it comes to my campaign, my run for local office. I have seen over and over again that the state has continued to preempt the city, continue to preempt our autonomy as a local city, as with our local government, and we should be pushing back on the state. We should understand the dialogue and the power that we have as a city to push back on state agencies, on the legislature, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, that's a good question. What power do we have? Because we are purely creatures of the cities are purely creatures of the state, and we have somewhat soft power, but I feel like there's constantly this tension of like, how much do we poke the bear? How much do we push back? Are we just going to provoke a backlash and then we're going to be worse off because of it?
Yeah, I think that it is soft power, you're right. I think relationships across government is the way that I answer that question. I talk to some of the local delegation, some of the local council members, and candidly, I talked to our current council member and asked her, how, and this is absolutely no detriment to her at all, but I said, how often do you talk to Rep. Howard or Rep. Goodwin, whose districts overlap ours? And she said, not really that often. And that was kind of shocking to me, but I've seen that in my boss too. He rarely talks to the council members whose districts overlap his. And we just don't have enough dialogue and enough conversation across levels of government, especially between the state and the city. I've seen at the state, there are often times that the council will do something really progressive and inflammatory, and then the local delegation ends up dealing with the fallout from that, from the rest of the House, from a Republican-controlled legislature, and we almost get punished as a city because there wasn't enough conversations in between the state and the city. one example, the flip side of that I'll share is that with regards to Project Connect, many of y'all will probably remember during last legislative session, Representative Ellen Troxclair had this bill that she was really pushing for to try to basically ruin Project Connect. And so my boss was on the phone with the mayor pretty much every day for like 2 weeks leading up to that vote on the floor. And my boss was able to deliver a point of order on that bill, killing her bill, essentially saving Project Connect at the time.
The coup that saved us all.
And so that is one example of that soft power can be so powerful, and just conversations, relationships. Because my boss had a relationship with Mayor Watson, we were able to make this really important thing happen. And we need to see more of that across the city, state, county, school district, and our federal representatives as well.
Yeah, you talked about Project Connect. One of our questions was about, our Project Connect, our city's plan to transform our transportation network, was approved in voters overwhelmingly in 2020. But since then, it's shrunken due to financial constraints. There's a lot of legislative and legal attacks by people like Ken Paxton at the state legislature. Where do we go from here?
Yeah. I have long been a vocal supporter of Project Connect. I really believe in rail. I really believe in mass transit. I did a fellowship in DC a couple years ago, and it was so transformative for me to see how accessible the entire city was from Arlington to Baltimore, just because of the metro. And I really wish that we had something like that here in Austin, and it's on its way, but it's not quite there yet. And we are becoming a premier city of the United States, and there is no other premier city of the US that does not have a mass transit system. So we need to meet that need. We need to meet it now. That being said, the current state of Project Connect is really frustrating and really disappointing. I voted for it back when it was first proposed. The current version of it is not what was initially promised to voters. I think that it's easy to point a finger and blame a lot of people. A lot of that is due to, it was proposed before COVID. There has been inflation. There has been governmental changes since then. There's a myriad of issues related to the pandemic that have slowed down the project. And things just always, with big infrastructure development projects like this, it's always more expensive than you expected it to be. So that being said, and then with regards to the lawsuit, that kind of goes back to my original conversation about Austin Travis County is under a microscope from the state, and pretty much it is a Republican talking point right now to halt, slow down, and ruin progressive projects in Austin. So we have got to think about how can we build up the relationships and make that culture disappear, whether that's through more alignment across levels of government, like I was talking, more bipartisanship, et cetera. We should be exploring that. And then we also need to make sure that we're not leaving ourselves vulnerable to lawsuits. I think that is a constant problem in the city, that we often find our progressive policies that we're trying to champion getting tied up in lawsuits, slowing down the projects and wasting taxpayer dollars. So we have got to make sure that we're checking every box. We're making sure that we are doing getting our funding sources from a very above board places, and making sure we're not vulnerable to lawsuits.
Yeah, so since since I have you, and you probably have you interacted with the kind of state legislators more than I do, can you help us understand what is the animosity from some state legislatures to rail and other infrastructure projects?
I mean, that's a really good question. I think rail and public transit in general is just seen as a progressive initiative, and for a lot of, and also Texas, it's Texas. We are a state and a culture that loves our cars and trucks, and it's really hard to get people to let go of that. I think one issue, and I am a lifelong Democrat. I work for a Democrat. I consider myself a progressive person, but one issue that we have culturally as a city is that we are just seen as this like extremely progressive place in our blue dot and our red state, et cetera. And so it makes us an easy target for the legislature. I think we need to think about reinventing that culture, showing people that transit is not a partisan issue, it is a bipartisan issue, that Austin is a bipartisan city. I am running for a bipartisan office, a nonpartisan office, and all the issues that we are talking about, housing, transit, et cetera, are not partisan issues. They benefit everyone. Transit benefits everyone.
Absolutely. So the other, besides Project Connect and I-35, the other big issue is transportation in the state. They are all the state highways that run through the city, and we've been the city of Austin. I think that we've been canceled several improvement projects on. I think Lamar have been canceled because it is a state highway. This was a big problem for San Antonio with Broadway.
Okay.
Do you see a path for us to having a better relationship with TxDOT and with the state in doing these transportation projects?
Totally. I think that I consider myself a relationships person. I want to meet people where they're at. I want to be bipartisan. I want to compromise and be pragmatic. I don't know enough about the specific highway, boondoggles that we're getting in, so I'll have to do some research and learn more about that. But I think that there is always room for us to bring everyone to the table to find compromise and to show folks that Austin is not the enemy.
I think that we are going to take an intermission.
Okay.
Welcome back, everybody. You've learned from our past sins, and we will now be using microphones. I encourage everyone to sit down, please. It's okay to look like having fun. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome back, everybody. So I've got a few more questions here. We're moving a little bit ahead of schedule, and that's okay. So once I get through, we are going to do a little bit of audience Q&A. One of our volunteers will be passing the mic around. And then I think we might be done. So, let me see here. What do we got? Okay, so from Environment, Texas, with the Highland, oh gosh, 1 second, friends. Okay. With the Highland Lakes currently 44% empty and our water supply increasingly at risk with climate change, the Austin City Council will next year consider an irrigation and landscaping ordinance to conserve water. Included is a provision to limit the area of irrigation systems to 50% of the lawn of new homes. Do you support this measure, and what other things can we do as a city to ensure that our water needs are up to snuff to meet our growing population?
Yes, I do support the initiative. I know that there's a lot of talk in terms of urban development for the environment about, totally getting rid of green lawns and single-family homes and promoting xeriscaping and different things like that. I like this initiative because it's a middle measure. We know a lot of folks with dogs, kids, etc., do want a lawn with grass that they can use for their everyday lives. But it doesn't need to be our entire plot of land that a single-family home is settled on. So I think it's a good, compromise and good half measure to address the environmental concerns with watering large lawns. I also think it can't be the only thing that we're doing. We need to be looking at promoting more infill development just so that the lots themselves are not as sprawling and large. We have less areas that we need to use tons of water on in general. And then also just promoting reclaimed water use wherever we can. I spoke earlier about how we've already had initiatives at the city level to make new developments use purple piping and promote reclaimed water use. We can also provide incentives and rebates for property owners to retrofit existing properties. And then also we can look into things like gray water usage, stormwater usage, rain runoff, and the like.
Thank you so much. So So this is from our friends at Safe Streets. In recent years, Austin has seen progressive transportation and streets projects such as the Barton Springs Road Pilot, the Living Streets program, and building out of the All Ages and Abilities pedestrian, bicycle, and urban trails network. What are your thoughts on these and other initiatives? Yeah, go that and I'll do the next part.
Yeah, I think I've touched on a lot of these topics already, but I am fully supportive of these kinds of initiatives. I am a huge fan of making sure that we have protected bus and bike lanes on our major roadways, on the work that City Leap is doing with Safe Streets and making sure that on our arterial roadways we have those protected lanes. We know that it creates a more accessible, attractive, enriching city to have mobility options like this. And then I also want to make sure that we look at our Barton Springs pilot that we did. It's been very successful. We've seen no major impact on traffic. We've seen a decrease in accidents on the road, and I know I was talking to Adam earlier this week from Safe Streets, and he was speaking about a lot of people he talks to often are like, I didn't even know anything happened to Barton Springs. I think a lot of the infrastructure projects that we want to do in Austin, there will be resistance. There will be, resistance because people are afraid of change. But a lot of the things that we want to do to create an easier, safer, happier, healthier life for folks in Austin, I think we will see when we do invest in these projects and they are fully functioning, people will be like, wow, how did I live without this?
Yeah, so similar to the Barton Springs, taking what we learned from the Barton Springs projects, a big initiative that Safe Streets, the campaign they launched recently, was for their City Leap plan, which the main piece of it would be lane conversions on all the Austin-owned arterials to create either bus or protected bike lanes within the next 5 years. What do you think of that initiative? Do you think it's feasible?
Yes, I think it's a great initiative. I'm fully supportive of it. I know I've seen in my neighborhood a particular exposition in Enfield and Lake Austin Boulevard, our major corridor arterial roadways in my neighborhood. We have a protected bike lane on Lake Austin Boulevard, and I've seen not just bikers but runners using it to a great success. It's been pretty transformative for the neighborhood. So with little impact on traffic, with little impact on everyday mobility throughout the neighborhood. So I have seen it work. I think it's a great idea, and I would be prepared to support it when on council.
Beautiful. So I think this might be my last question. It is the second Rethink 35 question about CAMPO. So maybe I should give a little bit of credit because this is one of the more wonky things that maybe not everyone knows, but the CAMPO is the Capital Area Metropolitan Planning body, and they direct federal funding for our about, I think, 5-county region. And so it's them that are releasing federal funds to do things like expand I-35. And so once a year, they put out a transportation improvement program, a TIP, and that's where they approve things like federal funding for I-35 expansion and other things. And so we have several city council members, and if she is elected, she may be one of the people sitting and representing Austin on the Campbell board. So the question from Rethink 35 is that if you do get to serve on the Campbell board, would you stand against things like the I-35 expansion, as all of our Austin reps recently did? They were voted down by by everyone else on the Campbell board.
Yes, I would be fully prepared to, vote my district, vote my city, and stand up for the interests of Austin on the Campo board. While Campo is made up of several different regions, counties, etc., we know that Austin and Travis County is the heart and center of that area. And so we have a huge impact on what happens, on the decisions that are made, and that needs to be reflected in our voices and our votes. And I'm prepared to represent my constituents, represent my city, and have a strong coalition and relationship with my fellow council members that are also on the Campo board.
Yeah, a big problem with Campo and with the metropolitan body organization in general is that we have a a relatively small representation relative to our size in our city, because many institutions in America, we do the voting based off of geography instead of population. So this is a problem all throughout the region. Something that Houston is doing is they recently had Houston voted basically as a city to say that we do not, a better deal for Houston, we do not like having such low representation, and so we are going to lead the board if they do not renegotiate themselves, and there's kind of chaos right now going on around that, but I know a lot of places are looking into that, and I'd be curious if you had any thoughts on.
Yeah, I would be definitely interested in thinking about how we can increase our voice and representation on Campo. While there are, of course, the surrounding counties that are represented as well, I would wager a bet that many of the folks living in those counties work in Austin, travel into Austin on a daily basis or weekly basis, and a lot of the transit needs are very Austin and Travis County centric. So I do think it would make sense that we have a strong voice and strong vote on Campo.
Thank you so much. I actually have one more that I found from our Windsor buildings. This will be our real last question before the audience Q&A. So your district includes environmentally sensitive areas, which often constrain land uses to single-family zonings. That isn't well served by transit. Even still, our region is facing a significant amount of construction in the coming decade that will create congestion pressures for everyone. So what could you do as a city council member? You already talked a little bit, but what could you do to increase the number of people who make active and shared transportation choices instead of driving alone to work, to school, to meet their needs?
Yeah, I've kind of spoken to this a little bit. I think that I really do believe that providing options that make people's lives better is the way to success with transit. Just like I spoke about with the McCullough station, we saw that is a situation where people are having a more efficient, easier option to get to Austin FC games than driving their cars. We need to look at where people are going, where they are coming from, what are their challenges with mobility that are already existing, and we need to think about how can we meet those needs with transit. Instead of coming up with, well, this idea sounds fun and good, so we should do it, we need to have evidence-based transit development. On that note, I do think that there are environmentally sensitive areas, and while I do, promote infill development and density, et cetera, we have to make sure that we don't develop. There are areas in my district that are not, open to development and probably shouldn't be. So I'm all about sustainable growth and responsible growth, and I think I'm the candidate to really shepherd that sustainable growth forward in Austin.
Thank you so much. Can we get a round of applause for lovely Chica for the Q&A? Okay, Peter Brennan is going to have a microphone and is going to bring it up here for us. And I need some of y'all to ask some questions, because I want you to ask. Anybody have questions? I know Simon has some questions. He's got them written down already.
Hi. Of course, thank you for being here.
So I'm an architect. I'm from Texas, but I moved here about 4 years ago. And I've never seen such a insane land development code in any other city I've ever lived in or visited. And so it's been quite a journey to learn how to build here in Austin as an architect and do it equitably and with environment concern, those sorts of things. So I'm curious, we've had a lot of ordinances passed this last 2 years. What policy would you specifically bring to create more options for housing? What is not currently working with the measures passed by City Council? And what would you do differently to help reduce the cost of getting your site building permit and the time that it takes to get anything developed in the city?
Can you repeat your second question? Sorry.
Sure. What would you do to reduce the time and cost to getting anything permitted in the city?
The one before that. So sorry.
The first one was, what would you do differently from what the city's been passing in terms of ordinances and things to the zoning code to make housing options possible?
Yeah, I don't know that I would do anything wildly different. I think our council is on the right track in terms of land use and land development. We have seen the current home initiative, phase 1 and phase 2 passed. We know that, especially to what I was talking about in terms of promoting different kinds of density in my district that are not high rises and large scale multifamily complexes, the home initiative is one way to promote density and diverse housing options without doing that and still preserving a residential neighborhood feel. Permitting process. So my disclaimer I'll say is this is an area I'm still learning. I have had many conversations with architects, builders, developers, neighborhood groups, neighbors, and I'm trying to really wrap my head around the issue. And one of the most common things I hear from people is that the permitting and development process is a nightmare. I've heard from folks that you have to go through like 10 different city departments just to get a project approved. It takes a long time. That creates a lot of cost for the developer, and of course that cost always gets passed on to either the homeowner or the renter down the line. So we know that that's a factor that's contributing to affordability. I want to do a deep dive into that process and see what redundancies are happening, where we can streamline processes. I know Site Plan Light has been a good effort at mitigating some of that. We shouldn't have small scale developments needing to go through the same arduous process that large multifamily developments need to, because their needs and their impact on the city are different. So I'm wanting to learn. I am planning to look into this topic. I know that it's an issue, and I think I'm the right person to tackle it.
So I think I have to follow for that one. So something that I've seen, you mentioned Site Plan Light, something that I've been seeing a lot lately, and I, maybe not knowledgeable enough to say this for certain, but something that I've heard from people that I trust is that we have this dynamic in city council that oftentimes, city council is doing these big, bold, progressive things. And then they kind of get lost in staff, and like this, sometimes staff either they bury it, or when it comes back, it is like pretty far from what's city council asked for. Mm-hmm. And what do you think that we can do about that as a city, or should we be doing something to make our staff more receptive to the asks of our city council?
Yeah, I think I have a unique perspective to offer on that topic in particular. Having been a teacher, I was on the side of policy implementation. I was on boots on the ground, the one receiving policy decisions given to us by our legislature. And I was able to see the issues that arose with it. I was the one implementing policies. And then now working at the state, I'm on the other side of things. I am part of the governmental body that is creating policy. And through my work at the state, I've really seen just how important it is to follow up on policy and make sure that implementation is occurring in the correct way that it was originally prescribed by the governing body. So, one example is that we recently passed a pretty sweeping community college finance reform, HB 8, last legislative session. And so my boss sits on the higher education committee where I staff him. And I've been meeting during the interim with multiple different organizations related to higher ed, with local community colleges, and making sure that the implementation of this legislation is going according to plan, that it's helpful, and that it is actually solving the problem it was originally intended to solve. So I think because of those experiences, both as a teacher and at the state, I have the right skills needed to, when on council, build relationships with departments, with staff, with the neighborhoods, with residents in my district, to make sure that I continuously follow up on policy and make sure that implementation is happening according to plan. I also think policy is a living process, and we are never done with policy. So I definitely believe in the iterative process, and every time we create a policy, we need to follow up, look at implementation, and see what further iterations need to be made.
Thank you so much. Any other questions?
Earlier you mentioned land use, not land use, but local control.
Yes.
And I was curious about your thoughts on local control as it applies to land use.
Yes, think local control as it applies to land use is extremely important. One example of this I'll give is the ADU bill that we had at the legislature earlier last session. I was privy to a lot of conversations between my boss and other local representatives in Austin about how do we vote on this bill. Ultimately, my boss was one of the only people that voted for allowing accessory dwelling units to be developed in cities. And I think that if we had more conversations across levels of government, if our local elected officials were talking to the city council more, they would see that this is something that the city wants. This is the way that the rest of the city is going. And ultimately, I think those kind of land use issues are a local issue. It's very municipality dependent. And it shouldn't be something that Governor Abbott is making a decision for me living in my condo in Tarrytown, because he doesn't know what it's like, and we do.
Thank you so much. Reese, I believe, yes?
Yes. Hi. My question, I have two questions, if that's okay. My first question is, what is your position on public and social housing developed by the city or with city funds?
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, what is your position on tenants' rights? Thank you.
Great questions, thank you. I definitely think that we currently have several affordable housing initiatives in the city. We need to make sure that we continue to have those available, not only in certain areas, but in every area of the city. People deserve to live in every area of the city. And we need to make sure that we have those incentives in place for developers to develop more affordable housing units because in valuable areas. Your second question, tenants' rights. I am a huge believer in tenants' rights. Renters are a huge population in Austin, and we need to make sure that our renters' needs, rights, safety, happiness is represented, that they are not at the mercy of huge corporations, developers, etc. So I'm prepared to do everything I can to stand up for tenants, especially when we have many universities and many students who are renting and may not always be able to advocate for themselves because they're new to this kind of situation in the city of Austin.
You know, maybe something that we've experienced as a problem as a city is that everyone thinks that they should have public housing in Austin, but no one thinks that they want it in their neighborhood. And it's particularly, I think that's one of the more particularly ferocious battles of, when we've had the city of where should we build bio hotels and that sort of land. And I think my question for you is do you think that that people that District 10 deserves to have publicly subsidized housing?
So we do have publicly subsidized housing in District 10. We have a affordable housing development around 4 Points. And we've seen great success with that area. There are a lot of families, middle-income families, that have chosen to live in that area because of the Leander ISD schools, because of the safe neighborhoods. And I am interested to see what it would look like to have more initiatives like that. I think a lot of the initial pushback for people when they're thinking about affordable housing projects is they're like, oh my God, what kind of people are going to come into my neighborhood? But when we're thinking about 60% of the median family income in Austin, and the median family income is, I don't even know what, we're talking about teachers, firefighters, police. We're talking about just your everyday middle income working family. So I'm almost certain that myself as a government official would also qualify for that. So we're talking about young professionals. We're talking about middle income families. I also think that when we're talking about affordable housing developments and affordable housing projects, it has to make economic sense, not only for the city, but for the developer. So I am open to the idea. I'm curious to look at what areas of District 10 could make that economic sense for a developer for the city, and to encourage public engagement with the process there.
Thank you.
recommendation, your vision for safety here. And I think that it has a lot also to do with the bike riders, the fatalities. When you don't have the police on the street, those cyclists were killed, they could have been prevented. So if you could just share.
Of course, great question, Kathy, thank you. Public safety is one of the issues I care the most about, and when I think about public safety, I'm thinking a lot about community-based, holistic public safety. I think you're right that a lot of the biker pedestrian fatalities we've seen in Austin could have been mitigated with stricter traffic enforcement and public safety initiatives. And then when we're thinking about the safety on our public buses, on our urban trails, on the train, it's such a multifaceted issue. Most of the issues are arising because of the large number of unhoused neighbors in the city. And so that's something connected to housing, that's something connected to mental health in the city, that's something connected to affordability. And then when we're thinking about where APD is and where we need it to go, that's also a multifaceted issue. The APD is in such a precipice right now. We do have a huge vacancy in our cadet class, and I think it's a multi-part issue. One part of that for sure is just the disconnect in culture between our police and our citizens. There is a lot of distrust from citizens in Austin when it comes to the police. We've seen that since a lot of the protests in 2020 into modern day. And then there's a lot of frustration from the police about the way that they are treated by the city. So it's, again, one of these self-fulfilling prophecies where a lot of our police feel undervalued and underappreciated, underinvested in. So then the work is not getting done, the job is not being done to its fullest potential, and then the city feels that the police aren't doing their job, so we're not going to invest in them, and it just continues this cycle. I think that we desperately need a culture fix between the city, the citizens, and our police. And I also think that one big part of our cadet vacancies is also affordability and housing. Many of our police simply cannot afford to live in the city of Austin. A lot of our neighboring jurisdictions and cities are paying equal or more, and if they can live in cheaper housing in Round Rock and work for Round Rock PD for the same amount of money and not have to commute an hour in every day, they're going to choose that. So we have to think about more available housing, like I said, for those middle income professionals like our police. I'm also very interested in looking at more community-based policing initiatives, grow your own initiatives, talking with ACC and AISD to promote our citizens to grow up, learn to become a cop, enroll, and then work on policing and keeping their own community safe. And I think that's an initiative that could really affect some of the distrust issues in a really positive way. If it's someone you know and trust that looks like you from your own community, keeping your community safe, that's a really positive thing that we could explore.
Thank you very much. Ty.
Yeah. So there's been some conversation about pedestrianizing part of Guadalupe around UT campus. I was wondering what your thoughts on that, if and just in general pedestrianizing certain other streets throughout Austin, and then if you have any streets in mind in D10 that could potentially be pedestrianized someday.
That's a really interesting question. As a UT grad, I went to UT for my undergrad and my grad degree. I know when I was an undergrad, Speedway was open to cars, and then when I was in grad school, it was fully paved over and pedestrianized. And I saw how transformative it was for our student population to have a area that was purely for students, purely for pedestrians in the heart of campus. I don't know enough about the traffic flow needs on Guadalupe to really make a definitive answer about that, because while it is such an integral part of the campus and it has a ton of student foot traffic, it's also part of a greater it's part of the greater city's traffic flow as well because it's on the edge of campus. It's an issue I would need to learn more about. I'm interested. It sounds interesting. I have seen that Speedway has been a positive thing for students and for the university. And if we can pedestrianize Guadalupe without it negatively affecting the rest of the city, it's something I would be interested in.
Do we have time for Preston to ask a question?
I think we're coming up against time.
Okay.
So we gotta get out of here and clean up and all that sort of stuff. I'm gonna hand the mic back to you. Close this out. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big applause for Sheena Taylor. Thank you so much for being
One last thing I'll say, y'all, we are running a very grassroots campaign. I am an unconventional choice for District 10 and for this area of Austin. I am really trying to meet my district where they are while also meeting the needs of the rest of the city. And I need help from y'all, from my community, to help me do this. We recently had a lot of the most conservative areas of Austin redistricted into District 10. So it is a seat that is on the precipice of flipping red and becoming even more to the right of the way the rest of the city is going. So my ask to you is to help us with this grassroots movement. We have a donation card on the back table. If you are able to give 10, 20, 100, or the max 450, it is a very grassroots campaign that we're running, and any support you can provide us would be really appreciated. We are also planning to start volunteer block walks in the coming weeks, so if you want to get plugged in, please go to Ashika for Austin and join our email list. I also have my business cards on the back table that have my cell and email, so please grab one. And please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions, or if you want to grab coffee and talk about the issues, I'm always happy to do that. Thank you.